excited to have Professor Michael Loman be here to present this month's colloquium. The talk for today is one that I'm sure is very popular, and probably most of you are big Sesame Street fans. And so I'm just going to introduce Professor Michael Loman is a professor here in the Department of Film and Television Studies here in the College of Communications. We're excited to have him. He was the executive producer of Sesame Street for over 10 years, and we're really excited to hear about his experiences, how and why the show was conceived, and he'll talk about its international reach as well in his presentation. And so I'm happy to introduce Professor Loman as our November speaker, and the title of his presentation is Sesame Street, Revolution in Educational Television. So all welcome, Professor Loman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming on such a terrible day. I appreciate it. So I'm going to talk to you today about Sesame Street, why and how it was created, about the changes that I made on the show when I was the executive producer, and specifically why it revolutionized educational television. No PowerPoint, just me and the clips, okay? So sorry about that. So I was the executive producer of Sesame Street for about 10 years, from 1992 to 2003. And as such, my job entailed the complete oversight of all the creative elements of the show. So I work with the writers, and I work with the producers, work with the directors in the control booth and in editing. I worked with the Henson organization, which supplied all the puppeteers. I was responsible for making sure that the show came in on budget, which we did every year. And also, I was the public spokesperson for the show, going on shows like Good Morning America and the Today Show, and also giving interviews for newspapers and magazines. First interview I did was for Barron's, and they flew me to D.C., and I did an interview when I first started the job. And when the interview came out in Barron's, it said, the first paragraph said, he looked like any other executive. He had a power suit, he had a briefcase. The only difference was he was wearing a watch with a frog on it. That was the beginning of my Sesame Street days. So, Sesame Street. Why and how did it begin? So in 1966, a television producer in New York by the name of Joan Cooney and the head of a not-for-profit organization, Lloyd Morissette, were looking at the state of preschool education in America. And by preschool in those days, it was ages 3 to 5 years old. Come on over here. Please, come on, don't worry. So, 3 to 5 years old. And what they found was it was pretty poor. There was practically no daycare at all. There were some nursery schools which were expensive, and there was some kindergarten. But there wasn't a lot of preschool education. And consequently, when preschool kids got to school, they were lacking. They weren't prepared for school. And this was especially true of poor and minority children in the inner cities. So they were examining this situation and trying to find out what were preschool children doing with their time if they weren't in school. Well, obviously, they were watching television. And they were watching all the shows that you know that they were watching. They were watching children's shows. They were watching quiz shows, the cartoons. Interestingly enough, they knew the commercials and the commercial jingles by heart. In those days, there were more jingles for the commercials. And why did they know them? Because they were simple, they were focused, and they were constantly reinforced. And they had music. So little kids knew all the commercial jingles and could sing it. And that's why on Sesame Street, at the end of every show, you hear somebody say, Sesame Street was brought to you today by the letter R and the number 7, because the letters and the numbers are the commercials on Sesame Street. So after looking at all this, Mrs. Cooney and Morissette decided to examine the possibility of creating a new television series for preschool children. And what they wanted to find out is, could we create a television series for preschoolers that would keep them interested, that employed the best professional creative talents, and also employed the best educational talents? Could we then take that show out and test it on the target audience and find out if they really were learning what we thought we were teaching? And then could they bring the findings back to Sesame Street and have the producers and the educators change the show to reflect the findings that they found? And in this regard, they decided to make a proposal. So they made a proposal to the federal government Office of Education and to the Carnegie and Ford Foundations and to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for asking for $7 million, and that was for 18 months of preparation and 1 year of production on the air. And of course, they got that. And Sesame Street went on the air in 1969, and today, 40-plus years later, it is still going strong, and it's been seen in over 125 countries all over the world. So when they got their proposal confirmed, they set about creating the staff for the show. And what they did is they looked first to creative talent, and they went to a show, Captain Kangaroo, which was a really good children's show in those days. And they brought in Dave Connors and John Stone from that show. They brought in Matt Robinson, who was a producer of Black Public Affairs in Philadelphia. They went to Joe Raposo for the music. Joe created songs like Sing, C is for Cookie, Being Green, all those famous songs that you know about. He created all those songs. And they also went to Jeff Moss. Jeff created a song, Rubber Ducky, which you know, and was also a writer on the show. They went to Jim Henson, as you know, to create the puppets for the show. Now, Jim Henson had a new vision of puppetry in America. He thought that puppetry should be a combination of marionettes and puppets. And so if you combine for marionettes and uppets for puppets, you get Muppets that he created. And the characters that he created for Sesame Street only appeared on Sesame Street. So Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch and Telly Monster and Bert Ernie, Grover, all those characters were only on Sesame Street. The only crossover character was the Frog, who appeared on both Sesame Street and the Muppet Show. So that was Jim Henson. And finally, they went to the educators to formulate the educational component of Sesame Street. And they went to Harvard, and they brought in Jerry Lesser, and they brought in Ed Palmer, and they brought in Evelyn Davis, who was a community worker with the New York Urban League. So they assembled a staff. The first thing that they did on Sesame Street, and this is really important because it shows you the thinking of the show, the very first thing that they developed on Sesame Street was the syllabus. And they did this by having 5 3-day panels for the broad parts of the syllabus. Now note that this is a syllabus that's both affective and cognitive, which was most unusual. That had never really happened before. So for the 5 big panels, one was social, moral, affective development. A second was language and reading. A third was mathematical and numerical skills. A fourth was reasoning and problem solving. And a fifth was perception. And within those major characters, there were many, many sub-characters. Sesame Street has about 50 items in its syllabus agenda. And some of those specifics were symbolic representation of letters, numbers, geometric forms, recognizing body parts. We did a bit on Sesame Street for recognizing body parts where we went to the Museum of Modern Art and we shot a Picasso painting to teach nose, ears, and eyes on that. So that's one of the categories that they did. Visual discrimination, auditory discrimination, relationship concepts, self-confidence, overcoming obstacles, task persistence, physical environment, plants and animals, health, the arts, city and country, enumeration, imagining, letter sounds, verbal blending, measurement, and addition and subtraction. So you can see the range of this curriculum where it really encompassed a great deal, which had never been seen on television before. So, as I said, it started in 1969 and has been on the air for some 40-plus years. Now, I titled this talk Revolution in Educational Television. So let's look at how Sesame Street was a revolution in educational television, and I'm going to show you some clips to illustrate some of that. So these are in no particular order of importance. So the first one that I want to talk about is Sesame Street was done on 2 levels. It was created on 2 levels, for children and also for adults. And the thinking behind this was that children are sitting there and they have lots of questions. And if there's an adult sitting there with them, they'll answer the questions or make sure that children don't jump to the wrong conclusion. So it's really important, Sesame Street felt it was really important to have adults watch if they could. That's why you have celebrities on Sesame Street. A 3-year-old doesn't know who Whoopi Goldberg is. They just know that she's funny, okay? But adults know who all those celebrities are. And it's also a great way to show diversity on the show by showing different races, different cultures as well. And we've had every celebrity you can think of on Sesame Street from every area. From every area of music, whether it's rap, whether it's classical, whether it's jazz, whether it's country and western, from dance, modern, we've had ballet, all the ballet companies that are in New York. The Alvin Ailey Company, New York City Ballet, Dance Theater of Harlem, they were all on Sesame Street. Sports figures, literature figures, a whole wide range of people. But when I got on the show, one area we had not had on Sesame Street was the area of opera. And I thought it was important that children hear opera as well as all the other music. And so that one evening I was watching 60 Minutes, and they had a profile of Marilyn Horne on it. And she was really funny in that profile. So the next day I called her up, and I asked her if she would be on Sesame Street. And she agreed. And I'm going to show you the clip that we did with Marilyn Horne on Sesame Street. And what this clip illustrates is, first of all, it illustrates the syllabus. You can see the syllabus quite clearly, and it's underscored many times in this piece. But secondly, it really shows you what I just told you about, that Sesame Street really gears its shows when it can for adults to watch with children. So this is Marilyn Horne. Okay, so that was Marilyn Horne. The second revolution that I want to talk to you about was that Sesame Street created this extraordinary syllabus that was both affective and cognitive, as I said before. Children's shows during the day, first of all, didn't have a major syllabus, but if they did, they would create a show and throw in a pro-social message, like sharing or helping somebody. But Sesame Street didn't do that. Sesame Street created the extensive syllabus that I told you before, with all the cognitive and affective aspects of it. And Sesame Street created the show in a very unique way. On Sesame Street, when a writer starts to write the show, and the writer is given a curriculum sheet, and there are 8 or so items on the curriculum sheet from the syllabus that the writer must teach. And so the writer creates the segments of the show, the 8 or so segments of the show, specifically to teach the item that she or he is given to teach. Even the animations that you see on the show and the songs are all created to teach something in the syllabus. So it starts with the syllabus, and the creative part comes after that to teach it. And so every minute of the 60 minutes of Sesame Street, we are teaching something from the extensive curriculum. Yes, okay. So, and by the way, the research department, which is extremely important on Sesame Street, goes over every single script, every item that's written, to make sure that it's accurate, to make sure that it's safe. You don't know how children are watching the show. They could be watching it alone. You don't know what conclusions they're going to jump to. And so the research department goes over everything with a fine-tooth comb. There are many meetings between production and research to iron out the problems, because the writers want something really funny all the time, and the educators want something that's teaching something. And oftentimes they get into a battle about that, and they have to work it out. And if they can't work it out, it comes up to me to work out. Which has only happened a few times. Usually they're able to work it out. So that's the second. That's the second revolution. The third revolution was the set of Sesame Street. Children's shows in those days were fantasy sets. You know, there were bright colors and pretty costumes, and they would have cute little bunnies and chickies and things like that, and they would talk down to children. Sesame Street didn't do that. Sesame Street created an inner city set. And the reason they did this was that they wanted to prepare preschool children for success when they got to school. And so they wanted them to know something about the world that they lived in. So the set, if you look at the set carefully, it's toned down in lighting, it's toned down in colors. It looks to a great extent like an inner city set. And that was also to appeal to poor and minority children in the inner cities as well. But that was a distinctly different kind of set that you had ever seen before on television. Adults never talked down to children. That was in the original creation of the show, and that was an important part of it as well. The next revolution was diversity. Sesame Street was the first fully integrated cast that we saw, not only for children's television, but for television in general, way, way before Glee came about. Okay? It was Sesame Street that created this integrated neighborhood where people worked with each other, where people cooperated with each other, and where people got to know each other. Now, Sonia Manzano, who plays Maria on the show, has said many times in public that when she was growing up, she never saw anybody who looked like her on television. And Sesame Street sought to address that problem to show the whole range of people so all children could see themselves and feel validated when they watched this particular show on television. Now, Sesame Street teaches diversity in a little bit of a different way. We teach it on 2 tracks. The first track, which is common among anybody teaching diversity, is to show the contributions of different races, different cultures, different people all over the world. So they do that. And everybody is shown on Sesame Street. Every group, every nationality, every culture that we can find, we show. But the second way of teaching diversity, which is even more important in my estimation, is this. Sesame Street shows how all of us have things in common. So that a Puerto Rican mother and father are worried about their kids doing well in school in the same way as any other family is worried about their kids doing well in school. An Asian American family sits down to dinner and they talk to their children and they care about what their children have to say in the same way as any other family. does that. And the point of this, which is why it's so important, is by understanding all these things that we have in common, it removes the fear of different. It removes the mystique of people who are different. And that is such an important part of what Sesame Street tries to do and has done. Now, this diversity extends not only from racial and cultural, but it also extends to people with disabilities. And Sesame Street really pioneered that. For many, many years, Sesame Street had a deaf actress, Lena Horne. We've had a blind girl, Carrie, a 12-year-old, who's been on the show. And when I came on the show, I brought on a little girl, Tara Schaefer, in a wheelchair. And children were fascinated by Tara and the wheelchair. They had all kinds of questions to ask about, about this little girl living in the wheelchair. Now, Tara was in a wheelchair basically because her disease was a fragile bone syndrome disease where her bones would break very easily, and that's why she was in the wheelchair. So I want to show you a clip about Tara Schaefer and the clip I'm going to show you, it's a very short clip, is we did a ballet. Tara had said to us that she had always wanted to be a ballet dancer. So we did a ballet for her on Sesame Street, and we hired a choreographer who was also had a disability and was in a wheelchair. And that's what you'll see. And you'll notice, by the way, that Tara has a cast on her arm. That's because she had broken her bones just before we were filming this particular piece. Now, the piece I'm going to show you starts with the ending of another piece that I wanted you to just take a look at. It's Angel Correa, who at that time was a principal dancer with American Ballet Theater, and he's dancing with the letters of the alphabet. Kids love this piece, and they scream out the letters of the alphabet every time a new letter comes on. So I just wanted you to just see what that looks like. Then you'll see the piece with Tara, and then finally I want to show you a piece showing the brilliance of the puppeteers on Sesame Street. The person who manipulates, who is Elmo, is a 6'2" African-American, Kevin Clash, and he is extraordinarily talented. And you'll see a little bit of Elmo dancing to Count Basie music in this little clip. Now, this is not animation, okay? This is puppetry, and we've used a technique where we have the puppeteers dressed up in a blue outfit, and we shoot it against a blue background, and the puppeteers are washed out, and all you see are the puppets. And that's a blue screen technique, which we've used a lot in the show. So that is what we're going to show you now on these clips. extraordinary puppeteering. And Tara's story is when we found out that Tara had always wanted to be a ballet dancer, and we decided to create that ballet for her. We really were thrilled. She was so touched by that, and she was so happy to do that. So we felt really good about being able to do that for Tara. Okay, the next revolution I wanted to mention is that there was no physical violence on Sesame Street. The creators of Sesame Street felt that little children see enough physical violence on every other channel and every other show. And what they really need is to find ways to deal with problems where they don't punch somebody in the nose. So there's no physical violence on Sesame Street ever. And you see Muppets doing some slapstick physical comedy, but nobody hits anybody, and there's nothing like that. We create other ways for children to learn to deal with problems and conflicts. The next thing was the Muppets. When Sesame Street originally was created, there were no child actors as running actors on the show. Children were used on the show, but they were used in the background. You saw them playing in the playground and all that. Sesame Street created the Muppets to be the children on the show. And they created all of them with childlike qualities. So Big Bird is kind of goofy, and he bumps his head every time, and he makes mistakes. And that was to teach children that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do this. Oscar the Grouch was created to show people that children, that it's okay to feel grouchy at times. We all feel grouchy at times. Telly Monster was created because he was so nervous all the time and worrying about things. And he was created to show children that they didn't have to worry, that things could be calmed down for them. So that was an unusual aspect of Sesame Street. I want to show you one more, speaking of the Muppets, I want to show you one more piece, which I love, this piece. This again is blue screen. You have 4 puppeteers manipulating Elmo. And this is from a piece where Elmo is dancing on the moon. I want you to look at the body English of Elmo and see how brilliant these puppeteers are and how they did this. Okay.
Elmo's gonna dance on the moon!
Isn't that extraordinary? Amazing, amazing art, amazing work. Okay, the last revolution that I want to talk about is on Sesame Street is breaking down stereotypes and opening up possibilities. Sesame Street wants to teach that little girls can be doctors and nurses. Little boys can like playing the violin as well as playing football. And it goes through great, great difficulty to open up and expand all this for children on the show. Now, I think the best way to illustrate this is to tell you about a series of special shows that we did. Every year, Sesame Street emphasizes one aspect of the curriculum. So this particular year, we were emphasizing science. And we would bring in all preschool experts to show us how to teach science properly. Now this is science for preschoolers, so we're not teaching the theory of relativity here. We're teaching some very simple, basic facts. But the writers came up with an extraordinary idea. The writers came up with an idea to span 12 shows to teach science. And this is the idea that they came up with. Oscar the Grouch has a pet worm named Slimy. Slimy is a worm puppet. It's about that big. And little children love Slimy because everything is in miniature in his world. So whenever we go to Slimy's home, we see him sleeping in a tiny little bed with a tiny little desk next to him and the whole thing. So kids really like Slimy. So anyway, Slimy was reading in the Worm Gazette that WASA, the Worm Air and Space Agency, was planning to send a worm rocket ship to the moon. And they were looking for a few good worms. Okay? So Slimy and Oscar went down to WASA headquarters, and by the way, we had technical advice from NASA on the whole series of stories. So Slimy and Oscar went down to WASA headquarters, where Slimy tried out. with a whole group of other worm astronauts to be from all over the world. And they went through all these tests. You know, Slimy and all the other worms were put on a round dish, and the dish was spun as fast as could be, and worms flew out all over the place. And Slimy managed to stay on it. And the test was called the Hold On Tight-O test. And Slimy passed that test. And Slimy passed all the tests. So Slimy was selected as one of 5 international worm astronauts to go to the moon. And as Slimy's spaceship went up into the air, and it went up because Snuffleupagus sneezed and sent it up into the air. As the spaceship went up with Slimy and the 4 other international worms, and you saw them in this, you heard Tony Bennett singing Slimy to the Moon. Now, as part of it, that's another example of doing it on 2 levels, okay, the show on 2 levels. Now, as part of this series of shows, we sent 2 of our teenagers down to Florida. Florida has a space camp for teenagers where they put them through all the things that astronauts go through. They simulate all the tests that astronauts go through. And we filmed this documentary. And we sent our 12-year-old Latina, Gabriela, who is the daughter of Luis and Maria, and we sent our 13-year-old African-American, Miles, who is the son of Susan and Gordon, down to do these little documentaries. And they had a great time, and the pieces came out really wonderful. Now, we test these shows, okay? And we test them in daycare centers, middle and lower income daycare centers. So we were going to test one of the shows with these 2 pieces in it, these 2 documentaries, and the show in general. And we went out to a daycare center in Harlem. And there were about 30 of us from Sesame Street, and there were 15 children, 5 3-year-olds, 5 4-year-olds, and 5 5-year-olds. And the children watched the show, and after the show, each one of us had 1 child to interview to see what they learned, what they didn't learn, if they liked the show or not. So I had an adorable little 4-year-old African-American girl, and she was really pretty. She was really excited about Sesame Street. She was dressed in a very pretty little dress, and her hair is all in ribbons, and she was thrilled. So we sat down. She sat on the floor, and I sat on one of those little chairs that they have in daycare centers. And I said to her, "Did you like the show?" And you know, 4-year-olds are not too verbal on a lot of things. So I said, "Did you like the show?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "I liked it a lot." And I said, "Can you tell me why you like the show?" And she thought, and she smiled, and she said, "Because I'm going to be an astronaut." And I thought all the work we did just to hear that little girl open up whatever possibilities in her life would be was really worth the work that we did. And that's a really good example of what Sesame Street tries to do in opening up boundaries and breaking down stereotypes for kids on the show. So that was a really good example of that, I think. Now, the changes that I made on Sesame Street, I came in 1992 and stayed till about 2003. And I made a number of changes on the show. The first change that I made was to increase the female Muppets. When the show began, it was Jim Henson and his fellow Muppeteers, and they were all men, so except for one, I think. So they created all these male puppets. And through the years, there were very few females, and Sesame Street had been criticized for that. So we set about creating a star. We created Zoe, who was the new female puppet, and later on they created Abracadabi. And we also had Rosita. Rosita was a Spanish-speaking puppet, bilingual, who we had not used a lot, but we started using her a lot. And I think that helped a great deal with that. So that was one thing that I did. The second thing I did was I added children as regular running characters. Remember I told you that the original concept of the show was that the Muppets would be the children with their childlike qualities. But I felt that it was really important to have children model certain things for the country and for other children. And I thought it was especially important to have intact minority families. So we brought on Gabriela as the daughter, the 12-year-old daughter of Luis and Maria, and we brought on Miles as the 13-year-old son of Susan and Gordon. And so we could see many family situations with them that I thought was very valuable for kids to see in general. I reinforced the letters and the numbers on Sesame Street. In the past, Sesame Street had shown one animation of a letter or a number and then gone on to something else. And I didn't think that was really very supportive of that learning process. So I changed it to do 3 of them in a row, 3 different ones. So if you're going to teach the letter T, you would have 3 different animations in a row, one after the other, teaching the letter T. I added a major computer curriculum, which we had not had on Sesame Street. A lot of kids did not have computers. A lot of kids, preschool kids, didn't have access to computers. And that was certainly a major thing that we could help for them to get to school knowing a little bit more about that area. And finally, the most important thing that I created was, with the writers created, was Elmo's World. Now, the demographics for Sesame Street in the beginning were 3 to 5 years old. As years went by, the children watching became younger and younger. And so the demographics ended up being 2 to 4. There are even some parents putting their kids in front of Sesame Street at age 1, which we didn't want at all. So the kids watching the show, the youngest kids, didn't have, Sesame Street is a 60-minute show, the only one that's 60 minutes. At the 45-minute mark, we noticed that some of the children they didn't have the attention span. They were starting to go away from it. We saw this in daycare centers when we watched the children watching the shows. So we created a segment at the end to bring these kids back, which was Elmo's World. It was all about Elmo. Elmo is the host, his entire world, and the whole 15 minutes was about one topic that we were teaching. So it might be about pets. It might be about families, all different family structures. It might be about any of those items, and Elmo was the star of it, and Elmo was, there was always a baby. I want to insist that we have a baby in there because a lot of the kids watching had little babies for brothers or sisters, and I thought that was important for them to relate to that. So that became hugely, hugely successful. Sesame Street has sold more DVDs of Elmo's World than anything else. It has become really an important part of that particular show. So that's some of the things I did. The final thing that I want to mention that I did on the show and changes is when 9/11 happened, we wanted to do something on Sesame Street to address 9/11 for preschoolers. And as we always did, we brought in preschool educational experts to help us to decide what to do. And they said that they did not think it was a good idea to do anything on 9/11 because children had seen quite enough of that on all channels, on all shows. And they felt it would traumatize them even more to see more about 9/11. And they suggested that we take some fears of children, normal fears that they have, and try to address those, and in that way we could help children. So we created 5 special shows about that. And the one that I'm going to show you now is a show about fire. Little kids are frightened of fire. And it takes place in Hooper's store. And it shows you another character that I brought onto the show. We didn't have any Asian American characters, running characters on the show, so we brought on Alan Maroka to be the proprietor of Hooper's store. And you'll see him here with Maria. Now, we filmed this show in a fire department in Harlem, a real fire department, and we didn't use actors. We used real fire people in this episode. And so you'll see them, and you'll see this particular episode. These are clips from the episode.
Alan, look! Look! Something's on fire in the kitchen.
I'll get the fire extinguisher.
I'll call the fire department. Come on, Elmo. Stay low and go. Fire in Hooper's store. Wow.
Scary.
But, Mr. Bill, don't you know a secret?
What?
Elmo was scared before, but Elmo isn't scared anymore.
You were in a fire before, Elmo. That's a scary thing.
It is, Mr. Bill.
But as long as you know what to do, to call a grown-up if you see smoke or fire, to get out of a building where there is a fire, and stay out until a grown-up tells you to go back in.
Yeah.
Well, then there's a lot less to be scared of, okay?
Okay.
Chow time!
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Mr. Bill.
You're welcome, Elmo.
Thank you, firefighters. Yeah. Yay for the fire.
Come on, everyone, let's see.
Oh, good. I want to try some of that.
I think to become a firefighter, you have to
be brave, be pure-hearted, and care about other people. When I grow up, I want to be a girl firefighter. Ding, ding, ding! Fire dogs are really excellent, and they're so great because they are so excellent. I like firefighters because they save people. Thank you, firefighters! Thank you, firefighters! Thank you, firefighters. I love you.
Okay. Are we okay on time? Okay, I want to show you one more clip before I talk briefly about the international productions. One more clip. This was shown over 40 years ago, and I wish that I could claim credit for it because it's a brilliant piece. It really is. It is all about diversity, okay? And it's Lena Horne, the great American singer, and she's working with Jim Henson, who is manipulating Kermit the Frog, and the song is by Joe Raposo. And as I said, it's all about diversity. Oh, just before this starts, I showed you a clip of when we welcomed Alan Maroka to Sesame Street. We did a song called Welcome to the Neighborhood, and it's a chance for you to see just the ending of it, the entire neighborhood welcoming him. And you can see the diversity on Sesame Street in that particular neighborhood.
Say hello, you friendly smiling face. Take all we have to give.
That's Lionel, Susan, and Gordon.
We want to say welcome. Welcome. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the party. We want to say welcome, our friends. Welcome every day.
It's not easy being green. Having to live each day the color of the leaves. But I think it would be so much nicer being red, or yellow, or gold, or something much more colorful like that. No, it's not so easy being green. Seems you blend in with so many ordinary things. People, they tend to pass you over because you're not standing out like splashy sparkles in the water. Like stars in the sky. But green is the color of spring, and green can be cool and friendly like, and green can be big like an ocean, or important like a river, or tall like a tree.
But when green is all there is to be, it could make you wonder why.
Oh, why wonder?
I'm green. It'll define me.
It's beautiful. And I think it's
think that's a stunning piece of artistry. Just briefly, before I'd be happy to answer some questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foreign productions. So Sesame Street's been done in over 125 countries in many different versions. In the American version dubbed, or the American version in English, but a lot of countries create their own. And it's the same process as Sesame Street. They have to create a syllabus that's correct for their country. They have to create puppets that are going to work for their country, and a setting that's going to work for their country. So two productions that I was really involved in were the combined Israeli-Palestinian production and the Chinese production. The Israeli-Palestinian production, I went to Jerusalem for a week and we worked on a kibbutz, and it was a very interesting experience. These were obviously the liberals from both sides. This was a number of years ago, and they wanted to create something for their children that could help bridge the gap. So we spent a week there, and it started off very tense, even though these were the liberals on both sides. We had to get them to work together, okay? So at lunchtime, we had them paired up, the Israelis and the Palestinians eating lunch rather than separately Palestinians and Israelis. And then on the writing process, we paired them up in twos, one Israeli and one Palestinian, together to work on a project. And little by little, as the week progressed, we got them to work together. The Israelis had had a big television industry before that and had all the camera equipment and all that stuff. Palestinians had very little, but the Palestinians had a very clever idea. They brought one of their writers was a 12-year-old girl, which I had never seen before and which I thought was a great idea. So that was an interesting week in which we finally got them together to agree on the boundaries of it. The Chinese production was interesting in that first of all, it's the syllabus. So I asked before I started on this production, I wanted to make sure we were going to do things on this Chinese production that were real. And I asked them, are you going to talk about the fact that little girls are as valuable as little boys in China? And they assured me that they were, and they indeed were, and they did that. So I went to China, and I had 125 scripts with me that I read on the plane. And on every script I wrote, what is the beginning, what is the middle, what is the end, what is the conflict? Because the style of writing is very different, very flowery and poetic, and it isn't Sesame Street style. Now, the problem with an international company is you want them to do Sesame Street American style because that's what they've contracted to do, and yet you have to show respect to their country and their traditions and their way of working. One of the difficulties in Asia, of course, is saving face. I had 125 scripts to finish in a week, and if I were working with an American producer, I could say, fix this, do that, this sucks, change this, get rid of that. Can't do that. So on every script, working with the Chinese producer, I would have to say, you know a lot better than I do. You know, how would you, or what is your advice on? And so it took forever to get through all these scripts and doing that. And it's a very hard thing. You just don't want to be the ugly American and put your foot in your mouth. And I thought I had done that with one thing. Because the second day I was there, the Chinese animation producer came up to me and she showed me, she was very proud of the storyboards that she had created for the animation. And I looked at the storyboards, and they all had Western faces. And I was taken back, and I said, why are they all Western faces? And she said, well, that's the way we've always done it. She said, if you look at the advertisement on the buses, you know, or any of the advertisements, you'll see we use Western faces. And I did check that out, and she was correct. And I said to her, but how are Chinese children going to feel positive about themselves if you are holding up the epitome of sophistication or beauty or intelligence to be Western? And she didn't say anything, and I thought, oh, I really put my foot in my mouth on this. And so she left, and 2 days later she came back and she brought new storyboards, and she had revised everything to show Chinese faces on the characters. So I thought, I earned my salary. I did a good thing with this. So that's basically experiences. Every international company has a different location. In Norway, it surrounds a railroad station. In Spain, it surrounds a marketplace. And the characters are all different according to what they want to teach in the syllabus. Okay, so I'm happy to answer some questions if you have them, if I can answer them. Yes?
So you talk a lot about diversity. I've heard, and I just wondered if you could clear this up, that Bert and Ernie represent a gay couple. Is that true, or
Okay, the question is, do Bert and Ernie represent a gay couple? No. Bert and Ernie were conceived to show friendship between two males on Sesame Street. Rumors have started through the years, and I think that a lot of college kids were instrumental in these rumors, thinking that it would be really funny to call them a gay couple. But it's had ramifications, because Sesame Street has a big arena show, and we were doing a show in the Deep South, somewhere in the Deep South, and somehow a rumor got out that the show was going to have Bert and Ernie getting married. So all the people canceled the show, and Sesame Street had to put out a statement, and it had to be a statement. I wanted the statement to be not apologizing for that, but just being clear. Not apologizing for the fact that they couldn't be married, but just being clear about what was going on. So in answer to your question, no, they were not created as a gay couple. We have had celebrities who were gay on Sesame Street and lesbian, a number of them. And we've got a family episode where we show different structures of families. There are two men in one episode. But we don't teach gay. We don't teach anything about sex. We don't teach anything about politics. We don't teach anything about religion, because the feeling is that the kids are too young, and the range of possibilities, certainly for religion or other things, is just too wide. So that's why we don't teach that. Other questions? Yeah.
So you said that the research department was in charge of making sure that there was nothing that could be construed by children. What's the most interesting or touchy subject that you've had to rewrite because it was misinterpreted by your test subject?
Very little. I mean, it really is very little that's been rewritten because of that. It's a case of point. I would get a call in the control booth because we were doing a playground scene, and the head of the research was saying, that's dangerous the way the slide is set up, or the swings are set up, or something's dangerous there, change that. Or they would get into an argument about, there was a song, a famous song on Sesame Street that Snuffleupagus sings, If I Was a Cloud. And there was a major fight between production and the educational people, because the educational people said, obviously, it's not correct grammatically. It should be If I Were a Cloud. And the creative people said, if you change the song, they'll lose interest in the character, because they bought this from the character, and that's the way the character talks. So there was a big fight about that. So it doesn't get beyond that. They did do a show about divorce. And before they aired the show, they tested it. And children were traumatized, absolutely traumatized. And they did it in Sesame Street fashion, so it was done tastefully. They were so upset that they killed the show. They ate the show. They never showed that. That's the only extreme example of that I can think of. Yeah?
How did you get involved with Sesame Street?
I was in California working on I wrote sitcoms. And I noticed in the trade papers that, on the front page, that the executive producer was leaving. And so I called my agent and I asked her to submit me for the job. And she did. And they had hired a headhunter company. And they came out to California to interview me. They interviewed me 10 trips. Came out 10 times to interview me, asking me all the things that I would do on the show, how I would change it, what I thought. And they interviewed everybody and his brother out there. And finally, they flew me into New York to meet Mrs. Cooney, who I mentioned before, and the other people in charge of Sesame Street, and to be interviewed by them. And after that, they offered me the job. So that was 10 times. I said, there's nothing more I can think of to tell you about Sesame Street. Yeah.
Has Sesame Street ever tried to teach the internet? And if so, how?
I don't know what they've done in the last 6 or 7 years. I know we did set up some animated things. I'm not sure what they taught in that respect, but they would have taught it. They will be teaching it as part of that curriculum, certainly. But I can't tell you exactly how they've done it in recent years. I'm sorry. Yes.
You mentioned that your demographics shifted to 2 to 4-year-olds. So how much of the curriculum changed in general?
The curriculum gets revised every year. One of the things they found out is there was too much curriculum because they spread it over the whole season. And they felt it was better to simplify the curriculum and reduce it. So that's the only thing that really changed in terms of the curriculum. There are items in the curriculum for all ages. I mean, there's no way, you can do it for one age or for one person or for one level. It's for all ages, and so it's a magazine show. And so there are all different places of different levels that you see the curriculum, and that has remained the same. But it's just that the curriculum has been reduced on Sesame Street. Also, the set's been reduced. We did, Sesame Street decided when I came on to expand the street and go around the corner and open up different people in different shops. And we tried all kinds of wonderful things. We had great ideas. We had a trio of 3 female squirrels, puppets, and we wanted to teach Motown. We wanted Motown music. So we wanted them to they formed a singing group, a Motown singing group, where they were all doing their paws this way and their tails would go like that way, and their heads would go that way. And it took 9 puppeteers to manipulate those different body parts on those puppets, and we found out a law of physics that you cannot hide 9 puppeteers behind an oak tree. So it was impossible, and those 3 squirrels, that was the name of their act, the squirrels, are now in puppet heaven, along with a number of other puppets. Yes?
Do you think puppeteering is still a viable industry in this day and age, and is it as difficult to break into as we might have heard?
I think the documentary that came out on Kevin Clash, Being Elmo, came out about a year or 2 ago. If you get a chance, it's a very good documentary. You should rent that documentary and take a look at it. It goes into a lot about puppeteering and what the state of it is. But I think it has been reduced somewhat, in television. Kids are somewhat more mature and dealing with computer sciences and dealing with all other things. And so I think that's been reduced in television. Yeah.
Speaking as a parent and a professor here, but I have 2 kids who watch Sesame, and we lived next door to Rosita for many years, who's a character on Sesame Street. And I can tell you, just from being a mom and hanging out with kids this age, this is their world. Sesame Street is still their world. This is where they learn so much information. They're getting their parents more and more to watch the show with them and teaching their parents. And what they're learning if they're not exposed to cultures. If they live in a community that's mostly Caucasian, they're not exposed to other cultures. They're learning so much, and that they're really incorporating it. And this is just anecdotal, I haven't done the research personally on Sesame Street and the effects on children, but seeing it as a parent and to my own children and to their friends, it's amazing what kind of influence Sesame has on their world.
Well, thank you. I've gotten lots of letters on Sesame Street, and you're right. There are parts of this country where it's all white, where nobody sees anybody of any color. Nobody sees anybody of any culture that's different from the culture in that community. And so I think it's important in that respect. I'll tell you one story, okay? Whenever we have a lesbian or a gay person, celebrity on the show, I get a flood of letters. Now, a lot of them come from Virginia, and they have a cross in the return address, okay? So this one time, I think it was Ellen DeGeneres. No, I'm sorry. It was, I forget who, the guitar player, Melissa Etheridge. It was Melissa Etheridge, had been on, okay? And 2 days before her piece was aired, she had come out and she was going to marry her girlfriend or something like that. So it was in all the papers. So I got a phone call after we had shown the Melissa Etheridge piece in which she taught, I think, the letter U or something, I don't know what it was, from a mother who was apoplectic on the phone, absolutely apoplectic. She couldn't even say the word. She said, you had she couldn't say the word lesbian or woman on the air. So I figured out eventually what she was trying to tell me, and she was furious, and she said, how dare you, and she went into this whole, rant and carrying on, and at the end of the conversation, and then she said to me, and I know what you're doing on Sesame Street. I know how you're influencing people. It's with those squiggles. And finally, I got out of her that she thought that we were embedding messages in the animation, liberal messages in the animation. So at the end of the conversation, and I was very polite, you have to be, and she said, well, I'm not letting my children watch the show anymore. And I said, I'm really very sorry to hear that, because there's a lot of great educational material on Sesame Street that they will miss out on. And she said, don't worry about that. I'm a teacher. And she hung up, and I had nothing more to say. I couldn't follow that line. So any other questions I can answer for you? Yes, Deb. Okay.
So every 2 years when there's presidential election as originally, the idea of the issue of funding on television comes up. I know that Sesame Street gets a minimal amount of money,
Right.
but because they license their format and they license their images for merchandising, there's a lot of money contributed coming in
Right.
to Sesame Workshop. Is it possible that Sesame Street would never be completely self-sufficient and not require money from these people?
Yes, times have gotten tougher. Sesame Street has reduced the programming because of costs. When I started, we were producing 130-hour shows a year. Now they're doing 26 every 2 years. So there's been a dramatic reduction in that because of the cost. They do make money on those toys. It's a not-for-profit organization, so all the money they make off of Elmo or those toys that they have goes back into production. But it hasn't been sufficient. You know, the production values, as you can see, are very high on Sesame Street and very costly. And as you also note, that they get a little bit of money from Corporation Public Broadcasting, I think it would be very hard for them to go it on their own. Also, there have been discussions in the past about leaving PBS and going to a commercial station, and they have ultimately nixed that idea because it's so identifiable with public television, and they thought that they would be destroying a lot of the good things in Sesame Street to take it off public television. So does that sort of answer the question? Okay. Anything else that I can answer? Okay.
Well, thank you so